Come, let us worship. Let us pay attention to the worth and dignity of every person as if we mean it. And let us imagine the world we need to create to uphold that worth and dignity for every last one of us. There is always work for us to do on ourselves, but that work comes to naught if we are not equally working to dismantle systems that depend on something other than the worth and dignity of every last one of us. For the world we dream to inhabit, we must practice both and. These words of Nelson Mandela: to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Today, we light the chalice with words from Kaminietzky, who writes, "Polish the mirror of your heart until it reflects every person's light." The sermon is respect and responsibility. What if being good isn't good enough to make things better? What if you and I being good enough isn't good enough to bring about the beloved community? As Unitarian Universalists, ours is no easy path. We hold important values. We strive to be honest about the importance of those values, and we strive to live into them. And sometimes we hold values that conflict with each other, and we have to be honest about that too. It's a cheap critique to claim that holding conflicting values somehow means we're hypocrites, even if holding conflicting values may seem impossible when viewed from the outside. Alice of Alice in Wonderland laughed. "There's no use trying," she said. "One can't believe impossible things." "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "When I was younger, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." Unquote. What impossible things do we believe? How about the importance of each and every person? How about the possibility of the beloved community? Hypocrisy is not holding values that conflict. Hypocrisy is when we claim moral standards or beliefs to which our own behavior does not conform. Hypocrisy is claiming moral standards or beliefs to which our own behavior does not conform. We should only hold the values we must, and we should hold on to them for dear life because those values create life. And if our values conflict, we must be the people who do the work of lifting up and living into the complexity of holding values that conflict. In that way, we're like the couplet in the Walt Whitman poem, Song of Myself, number 51. Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. And when it comes to values, we are large. We contain multitudes. Ours is an ethical rather than a creedal religion, more concerned with character than with correctness of belief. And that goes a long way to describing why we are the way we are, claiming our ability to make home for many kinds of believers as one of our strengths. And that way of being in the world allows us to gather based on what we agree is important about how we treat ourselves and each other and the earth. It's about respect. And it's about relationship. And that part of our way of being reflects our first principle well. The inherent worth and dignity of every person means that we believe each and every person is important. Our chalice lighting words from Kaminietzky Polish the mirror of your heart until it reflects every person's light. And we practice that, and sometimes even successfully. But we still have a ways to go. In my time with this congregation, I remember when we tried to welcome a family of 4, 2 adults and 2 children. One of the adults worked as a local police officer. It didn't work out for them to be a part of our congregation. And the truth is that I don't know why. Some people find us and they become us, and that's joyful. Other people bounce off of this place on their way to wherever it is they belong. But this particular encounter with the police family happened before the Black Lives Matter movement came to be. And the family of that police officer seemed, at least from a distance, nice enough. And it may have been that they were all about police reform or abolition before the rest of us knew that that was a thing. But I don't know. They didn't stay long enough for me or for us to find out. And I use them as an example because they are both easy and hard. And I use them as an example because we can get confused about what the first principle means. Sometimes we confuse the worth and dignity of ourselves as people with the worth and dignity of our behavior, rather than remembering that our behavior is supposed to be worthy and that living up to the first principle means we must bring our behavior forth in a way that upholds our own dignity and the dignity around us, of those around us, at the same time, all the time. And that can be hard to do. And what may be harder to do or believe or embrace is that we have been taught, and we are slowly coming to understand and enact, that while individual behavior is crucial and irreplaceable to bringing about the beloved community, individual behavior is insufficient by itself to bring forth the beloved community. For moving toward the beloved community, we need to do the work of the first principle by treating ourselves and everyone else as if we are all important, and we must work together to change the systems in our world that deny that very importance. That police officer might have been someone who treats themselves and everyone else as if they are important, but they work in and for a system that we know needs to change or disappear. Up until now, our principles haven't focused our attention on changing systems as much as they have pointed us toward changing ourselves. And again, changing and growing our own ways of being in the world is totally important. But when we focus our attention on our own behavior to the exclusion of paying attention to the systems that oppress people, we are taking our eyes off of having, being, and doing what moves us toward actual change. The writer, who goes by the pen name Butchdyke, says it this way: one of the major shortcomings of liberalism is the way it treats racism, sexism, and other forms of prejudice as character flaws, rather than inevitable superstructural manifestations of the systems of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. It shifts the moral failing onto the individual and away from society as a whole, so systemic inequality can continue to exist as long as we crucify the occasional bigot for show. That's a lot of words and a lot of concepts. We'll get back to that. But part of what Butchdyke is saying is we are supported by systems of oppression in doing just that. We are supported in focusing on our own behavior, on our own responsibility, on our own shame, so that we're too busy to experience what's happening to our siblings. We are supported in choosing a person or a group of people to blame and shame for our problems, so we can feel like we've done our civic duty. I have endless arguments with people in my life, even some who would claim a Unitarian Universalist identity, about the problems with police really just being problems with a few bad apples in the police system. And that is a super tempting analysis because it feeds into our value system that talks about the need for us to behave well. It's tempting to believe that if only those few bad apples would change their individual behavior or be removed from policing, we could just take care of this problem. But the history of policing in this nation tells a different story from its outset and on every day since. So, if we can't look to the first principle alone, or even our 7 principles, to find much beyond the reform of our own individual behaviors, we must consider changing or adding something to those principles. And that is what the 8th Principle Project is about. Maybe you've heard about the 8th Principle Project before today, or maybe you haven't. As the Reverends D. Vandiver and Crystal Zerfoss told us in our Time for All Ages, the 8th Principle Project seeks to add an 8th principle to our list of 7. You saw it before, you'll see it again. The 8th principle: we covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. These words, the words of this proposed 8th principle, have been adopted by over 120 Unitarian Universalist congregations. And here is a version of the 8 principles, though we only have 7 right now, built by religious educator Jermaine Cripe, that restates the 7 principles we already have and includes a very brief description of the 8th principle. It says, each person is important. Be kind in all you do. Learn to work together. Search for what is true. All people need a voice. Build a fair and peaceful world. Respect the earth, our home. Dismantle racism and other oppressions. Dismantle racism and other oppressions. So, where did the 8th principle come from? The 8th Principle Project is a grassroots initiative that began in 2013. It has been shepherded by a team that includes Unitarian Universalist Paula Cole-Jones, who came to this Edmonds congregation to teach us about immigration justice in March of 2012. Paula Cole-Jones is all about good trouble, and Paula Cole-Jones is an institutionalist who embodies a patience and persistence that is more than capable of helping us make institutional change. And there will come a day, perhaps at our next annual congregational meeting, where we will get to decide if we want to add our voices to the congregations that have already adopted the 8th principle. One of my colleagues in ministry says, if we took the first principle seriously, we wouldn't need to add the 8th principle. But our first principle work is forever and always a work in progress. And our Unitarian Universalism, which is religiously liberal, has challenges. Again, these words of the writer Butch Dyke. One of the major shortcomings of liberalism is the way it treats racism, sexism, and other forms of prejudice as character flaws. One of the major shortcomings of liberalism is the way it treats racism, sexism, and other forms of prejudice as character flaws rather than inevitable superstructural manifestations of the systems of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. It shifts the moral failing onto the individual and away from society as a whole. So systemic inequality can continue to exist as long as we crucify the occasional bigot for show. That's still a lot of words, and some real important ones about liberalism that could probably be pointed at Unitarian Universalism and be true enough to make us uncomfortable. Up until now, our principles haven't focused our attention on systemic change as much as they have pointed us toward changing our own individual behavior. But we could change that. We could adopt the eighth principle. We, as a congregation, could do that. It's a matter of respect and relationship. Will the Unitarian Universalist Association adopt the eighth principle? The good news, as we saw, is that over 120 of our congregations have already adopted it. But as Paula Cole-Jones says, institutions are complex. We are so fortunate to be part of an association that is open to self-examination and change. It is up to us to organize our efforts and do the work. Unquote. Will we adopt the eighth principle as a congregation? Well, charity begins at home, and we've got some work to do right here in Unitarian Universalism and right here in the Edmonds Unitarian Universalist congregation so that we can decide which side of history we want to be on. Another piece of good news is that this congregation adopted a statement called a congregational stand in 2019 that commits us to working toward racial justice and the dismantling of white supremacy culture. So adopting the eighth principle lines up nicely with who we already say we are. And voting to adopt the eighth principle as a congregation would line us up nicely with our sibling congregations in the effort to have this become a part of Unitarian Universalism's public-facing statement to the world. We are so fortunate to be a part of a congregation that is open to self-examination and change. It is up to us to organize our efforts and do the work. I hope we will adopt the eighth principle before it comes to a vote of the General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association. That would be a joy, and it would be one more way to show our commitment to that part of our mission that says we are committed to living our vision of a just and sustainable world. Polish the mirror of your heart until it reflects every person's light, says Command Kajuri. Relationship is a matter of respect. Amen. Blessed be. May it be so. And now we're going to release and reclaim our flame with these words. We release this flame, but not the light of truth. We release this flame, but not the warmth of this community. We release this flame, but not the fire of our commitment. These we will carry in our hearts until we meet again. And if you'd like to help me blow the candle out, I'm going to blow right over your hand. You ready? 1, 2, 3.